England, 1814. Some women were born to be forgotten, and Lady Juliana Fairmont had learned to wear invisibility as skillfully as other ladies wore silk. The crystal chandeliers of Lady Pembroke's ballroom cast their golden radiance across a sea of elegant guests, the music of the orchestra swelling through air perfumed with roses and expensive French scent. Couples moved in graceful formation across the polished floor, their laughter and whispered confidences rising above the melody. It was the height of the London season, and everyone who mattered in English society had gathered beneath the painted ceiling to see and be seen. Lady Juliana stood near a marble column at the room's edge, her position carefully chosen to offer both observation and obscurity. At 27, she had perfected the art of existing in spaces without drawing attention to herself. Her gown of pale blue silk was well made but plainly trimmed, purchased 3 seasons ago when her father had still maintained some pretense of caring for his eldest daughter's prospects. The modest pearls at her throat had belonged to her mother, one of the few possessions not sold to settle the Viscount's gambling debts. "Juliana, do stop lurking in the shadows like some unfortunate relation," came the sharp voice of Lady Constance Fairmont, Juliana's stepmother. The woman approached with her 2 daughters in tow, both dressed in the finest muslins that Juliana's own diminished inheritance had purchased. "You make us all look shabby by association. At least attempt to appear pleasant." "Yes, stepmother," Juliana replied quietly, her hands folded before her in a posture of habitual deference. Clarissa, the elder of her half-sisters at 21, glanced at Juliana with barely concealed disdain. "I cannot fathom why you continue to attend these affairs. Surely by now you must accept that your time has passed." "Perhaps she enjoys watching others succeed where she has failed," Millicent added, her 19 years evident in the cruelty that had not yet learned subtlety. "How many seasons has it been now? 5? 6? 5, Juliana said evenly, though each word struck like a carefully aimed arrow. 5 years since her mother's death from a fever that had stolen the only person who had truly loved her. 5 years of watching her father retreat into cards and brandy, of suffering her stepmother's increasingly harsh treatment, of becoming invisible in her own home. Lady Constance adjusted the diamond necklace at her throat, a piece that had once graced Juliana's mother's neck. "Do make yourself useful and fetch Clarissa some lemonade. The heat has quite overwhelmed her delicate constitution. And do try not to draw attention to yourself in the process." Juliana opened her mouth to respond when a sudden hush fell across the ballroom, spreading outward from the entrance like ripples on a pond. The orchestra continued playing, but conversations died mid-sentence as every head turned toward the doorway. "His Grace, the Duke of Windermere," the butler announced, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. The man who entered seemed to bring a different atmosphere with him, something cold and precise that cut through the warm gaiety of the evening. Adrian Montclair, 5th Duke of Windermere, stood framed in the doorway with the bearing of a man entirely comfortable with power. He was tall, easily exceeding 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled his impeccably tailored evening coat. His hair was black as midnight, swept back from a face that might have been carved by a sculptor seeking to capture aristocratic perfection. But it was his eyes that struck Juliana most forcefully, even from a distance. They were the color of winter ice, sharp and assessing as they swept across the assembled guests. "The coldest duke in England," whispered a lady nearby to her companion. "They say he has not smiled in public in 10 years, not since his father's death, and turned down every eligible lady presented to him," her friend replied. "Lady Pembroke must be beside herself that he actually accepted her invitation. He rarely appears in society anymore." Lady Constance's eyes had taken on a calculating gleam. "Clarissa, straighten your posture. Millicent, for heaven's sake, close your mouth. You look like a fish." She smoothed her gown and prepared to maneuver her daughters into the Duke's line of sight, then paused. "Juliana, do disappear somewhere. Your presence will only detract from your sister's appeal." But Juliana found she could not move. Something about the Duke commanded attention, though not in the way of other powerful men she had observed over the years. He did not seek admiration or defer to flattery as Lady Pembroke rushed forward to greet him. His responses were courteous but brief, his expression remaining impassive even as the hostess gestured enthusiastically toward her own daughter and several other young ladies positioned strategically nearby. The Duke's gaze moved across the room with methodical precision, pausing briefly on each cluster of guests before moving on. Juliana watched him with the same careful observation she applied to everything in her circumscribed world, noting the way others gravitated toward him, even as something in his manner suggested he found the entire gathering tedious. And then his eyes met hers. For a heartbeat, Juliana forgot to breathe. The Duke's attention had settled on her with an intensity that seemed to strip away the protective invisibility she had cultivated. Those ice-gray eyes held hers across the crowded ballroom, and something flickered in their depths, an expression too fleeting to name but unmistakable in its focus. She looked away first, her heart hammering against her ribs in a most uncharacteristic manner. When she dared glance back, the Duke had turned his attention to Lord Pembroke, accepting a glass of wine while maintaining that same cool composure. "There you are, Lady Juliana," came a warm voice at her elbow. Lady Philippa Wycliffe, a widow of 35, who had shown Juliana kindness when others offered only pity, appeared at her side with a glass of champagne in each hand. "I thought you might appreciate some refreshment, given your stepmother seems to have forgotten you exist." Juliana accepted the glass gratefully. "You are too observant, Philippa." "Merely attentive to my friends." Philippa's sharp eyes swept the ballroom. "The Duke of Windermere has graced us with his presence. How unexpected. And how many hearts are breaking even now at the realization that he appears entirely immune to their charms. Perhaps he simply values intelligence over performance," Juliana murmured, surprising herself with the observation. Philippa's eyebrows rose. "A radical notion, though I suspect you may be correct. He has the look of a man who sees through artifice rather too clearly." The evening progressed as such events always did, with Juliana remaining on the periphery, while others danced and flirted and formed the connections that would shape their futures. She watched Clarissa waltz with the son of an earl, and Millicent charm a wealthy baron's heir. Lady Constance preened at her daughter's success, while steadfastly ignoring her stepdaughter's existence. Juliana had just decided to find a quiet corner in which to wait out the remaining hours when a shadow fell across her path. She looked up to find the Duke of Windermere standing before her, his expression as unreadable as carved marble. "Miss Fairmont," he said, his voice deep and unexpectedly pleasant, despite its formality. "I believe we have not been properly introduced, though I find I know your name nonetheless." Juliana's throat went dry. Up close, he was even more imposing than she had imagined, though not in an unkind way. "Your Grace," she managed, curtsying with perfect form despite the trembling in her knees. "You have the advantage of me. Adrian Montclair, Duke of Windermere." He bowed with exquisite precision. "And I wonder, Miss Fairmont, if you might honor me with the next dance." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Around them, Juliana felt rather than saw the sudden attention of dozens of guests, the whispers that sprang up like wildfire. The Duke of Windermere, who had refused every invitation to dance extended to him that evening, was requesting a waltz with the forgotten daughter of a minor viscount. Juliana began, her mind racing. "Your Grace, surely you meant to ask—" "I asked you," he interrupted gently, extending his gloved hand. "If you are willing." Juliana placed her hand in his, feeling the warmth of his palm through the thin fabric of her glove. "I am willing, Your Grace." He led her onto the floor as the orchestra struck up a waltz, and Juliana felt the weight of every eye in the ballroom upon them. The Duke's hand settled at her waist with perfect propriety, his other hand clasping hers as they began to move. "You must forgive my presumption," he said as they turned gracefully across the polished floor. "But I find I am weary of artificial conversation and empty pleasantries. You, Miss Fairmont, appear to share my discomfort with such affairs." Juliana hesitated, then decided honesty was preferable to the simpering agreement most men seem to expect. "I confess I do find these gatherings rather trying, Your Grace, though I suspect my reasons differ from yours." "Indeed?" His ice-gray eyes studied her face with genuine interest. "And what might your reasons be? You, I imagine, find them tedious because you are pursued by every marriage-minded mama in London. I find them difficult because I am ignored by everyone, including my own family." The words escaped before Juliana could stop them, and she felt heat flood her cheeks. "Forgive me, Your Grace. That was inappropriate." To her astonishment, something that might almost have been a smile touched the Duke's severe features. On the contrary, it was refreshingly honest, a quality I find all too rare in society. They continued to dance, moving in perfect synchronization despite never having partnered before. Juliana found her initial nervousness fading as the Duke proved to be both an excellent dancer and an unexpectedly thoughtful conversationalist. "Tell me, Miss Fairmont, what do you do with your time when not attending tedious balls?" "I read, Your Grace, extensively, when my duties to my family permit." "And what do you read?" "At present I am studying Mr. Wordsworth's poetry and Mr. Scott's novels, though I confess a weakness for history as well." The Duke's expression shifted subtly, revealing genuine interest beneath his controlled exterior. "You have excellent taste. I recently acquired a first edition of Mr. Scott's work. The craftsmanship is remarkable." As the waltz drew to a close, the Duke bowed over Juliana's hand, his eyes never leaving hers. "Thank you, Miss Fairmont, for a most enlightening dance. I hope we may have the opportunity to speak again." Then he was gone, moving through the crowd with that same controlled grace, leaving Juliana standing alone on the edge of the dance floor as the full weight of what had just occurred settled upon her shoulders. The Duke of Windermere had singled her out, danced with her, conversed with her as though her thoughts actually mattered. And from the furious expression on Lady Constance's face across the room, Juliana suspected her life was about to become considerably more complicated. The morning after Lady Pembroke's ball dawned gray and damp, the sort of weather that seemed to match the oppressive atmosphere within the Fairmont townhouse. Juliana stood at the window of the small sitting room that served as her refuge, watching raindrops trace patterns down the glass while her stepmother's voice echoed from the drawing room below. "Foolish, presumptuous girl, to think the Duke of Windermere would show genuine interest in you is absurd beyond measure." Juliana closed her eyes briefly, steeling herself against the familiar sting of Lady Constance's disdain. The previous evening had ended in chaos after the Duke's departure, with her stepmother alternating between fury at Juliana's audacity in accepting the dance and calculation about how such attention might be exploited. A knock at the door interrupted her contemplation. Bennett, the aging butler who had served her mother, entered with an expression of barely concealed astonishment. "Miss Juliana," he said softly, his use of her Christian name a remnant of when she had been the cherished daughter of the house rather than its forgotten occupant. "A delivery has arrived for you. Most unusual." He stepped aside to reveal a footman carrying an enormous arrangement of white roses, their petals perfect despite the dreary weather. The crystal vase alone was worth more than Juliana's entire wardrobe. "There must be some mistake," Juliana whispered, though her heart had begun to race. "No mistake, miss." Bennett produced a small card from his waistcoat. The messenger was quite specific. Juliana took the card with trembling fingers. The handwriting was bold and precise, unmistakably masculine. "For the most honest woman in London. I hope these might brighten a dreary morning. A.M. A.M. Juliana breathed. "Adrian Montclair." "If I may be so bold, miss," Bennett ventured, his weathered face creasing into something approaching a smile. "Your mother would have been pleased to see you receive such attention. She always said you deserved far better than this household provided." Before Juliana could respond, the sitting room door burst open to reveal Lady Constance, her face flushed with excitement. Behind her stood Viscount Fairmont, his usually florid complexion pale with what appeared to be genuine shock. "Juliana!" Her father's voice held an unfamiliar note of something that might almost have been respect. "Is it true? Has the Duke of Windermere sent you flowers?" "It would appear so, father," Juliana replied carefully, unused to being addressed directly by the man who had sired her. Lady Constance circled the arrangement as one might approach a dangerous animal, her shrewd eyes calculating. "This changes matters considerably. Perhaps I was hasty in my assessment last evening." "You called her a presumptuous fool," Viscount Fairmont observed with the blunt honesty that drink often brought him. "Said the Duke was merely being polite out of pity." "I was overwrought," Lady Constance said smoothly, her transformation from harridan to solicitous stepmother so swift it might have been impressive had it not been so transparently false. "Juliana, my dear, we must discuss your wardrobe immediately. That blue gown, while serviceable, will not do if the Duke continues his attentions. We shall visit the modista this afternoon. With what funds? Juliana could not help but ask. Last month you informed me there was no money for new clothing. A flash of anger crossed Lady Constance's face before she mastered it. Circumstances have changed. Your father and I have discussed the matter, and we agree that certain investments must be made. If the Duke of Windermere is courting you, we cannot have you appearing in 3-year-old gowns. Courting. The word hung in the air between them, ridiculous and terrifying in equal measure. One dance and a bouquet of flowers hardly constitute courtship, Juliana said quietly. The Duke was merely being kind. Kind. Viscount Fairmont moved closer, his breath carrying the familiar scent of brandy, despite the early hour. The Duke of Windermere is not known for kindness, daughter. He is known for being the coldest, most calculating peer in England. If he has singled you out, he has his reasons. The words, though likely true, stung nonetheless. Of course there would be reasons. Men of the Duke's station did not pursue daughters of impoverished viscounts out of genuine interest. Perhaps you might allow me to consider the matter privately, Juliana suggested, retreating toward the window once more. Lady Constance's mouth thinned. There is nothing to consider. If the Duke calls, you will receive him with grace and gratitude. Is that understood? Yes, stepmother. After her family departed, Juliana sank into the worn chair near the fireplace, her mind a whirl of confusion. What game was the Duke playing? Surely he realized the effect his attention would have on her household, on her prospects, on her very existence within society. 3 hours later, as Juliana attempted to lose herself in a volume of poetry, Bennet appeared once more. Lady Philippa Wycliffe has called for you, miss. I have shown her to the morning room. Philippa was exactly what Juliana needed, a voice of reason in a suddenly chaotic world. The widow sat by the window of the morning room, her elegant features composed as always, though her eyes danced with barely suppressed amusement. Well, Philippa said without preamble, you have certainly set the ton abuzz. Every drawing room in London is discussing nothing but the Duke's unprecedented attention to you. Lady Sefton actually called on me this morning hoping I might provide some insight into your character. This is madness, Juliana said, sinking onto the settee beside her friend. One dance, Philippa. One single dance. And flowers, Philippa reminded her gently. Very expensive flowers delivered with a personal note. My dear, whether you realize it or not, the Duke has declared his interest publicly. Such gestures are not made lightly by men of his standing. But why me? The question burst from Juliana with more force than she intended. I am nobody. I have no fortune, no particular beauty, no connections worth cultivating. I am the forgotten daughter of a minor viscount whose main accomplishment has been avoiding complete scandal, despite my father's gambling and my stepmother's cruelty. Philippa studied her for a long moment. Perhaps that is precisely why. You said the Duke told you he appreciated your honesty. Most young ladies simper and flatter when speaking with men of his rank. You, I suspect, did nothing of the sort. I told him I found social gatherings trying because my own family ignores me. Juliana admitted, heat flooding her cheeks at the memory. It was wildly inappropriate, and clearly refreshing to a man who must endure endless artifice. Philip arose, moving to stand beside the window. I advise caution, Juliana. I do not doubt the Duke's interest is genuine in its way, but men of his rank marry for alliance and heirs. Be careful that your heart does not become entangled in something that may ultimately bring more pain than joy. Before Juliana could respond, the sound of a carriage arriving drew both women to the window. A magnificent coach emblazoned with a ducal crest had stopped before the Fairmont townhouse, and from it emerged the Duke of Windermere himself. He is calling on you, Philippa breathed. Juliana, the Duke is calling on you formally, in the middle of the afternoon. This is extraordinary. Lady Constance's voice could be heard shrieking orders to the servants, and Clarissa and Millicent appeared in the morning room doorway, their faces tight with envy. Father wishes you to come to the drawing room immediately, Clarissa said, her tone icy. The Duke is asking for you specifically. Juliana's hands trembled as she smoothed her simple morning dress, acutely aware of its worn cuffs and faded color. Philippa squeezed her arm gently. Remember who you are, her friend whispered. The Duke chose you, not the artifice others present. Show him the woman who impressed him last evening. The drawing room had been hastily arranged to appear more prosperous than it was, with Lady Constance's best shawl artfully draped over the worn settee and fresh flowers placed strategically to hide peeling wallpaper. The Duke stood near the fireplace, looking entirely out of place in the shabby gentility of the Fairmont townhouse, yet somehow making the space seem smaller by his presence. He turned as Juliana entered, and something shifted in his severe features. Not quite a smile, but a softening that transformed his face entirely. "Miss Fairmont," he said, bowing with the same exquisite precision she remembered. "Thank you for receiving me." "Your Grace," Juliana curtsied, desperately aware of her family's avid attention. "You honor us with your visit." Viscount Fairmont had positioned himself prominently, while Lady Constance perched on the edge of her chair, every line of her body radiating calculation. Clarissa and Millicent lurked in the doorway, their beautiful faces twisted with resentment. "I wondered," the Duke continued, his ice-gray eyes never leaving Juliana's face, "if you might do me the honor of accompanying me for a drive through Hyde Park this afternoon, with appropriate chaperoning, naturally." The request hung in the air, impossible and terrifying. To be seen driving with the Duke would cement society's speculation, would mark Juliana as someone worthy of attention rather than pity. Juliana began, uncertainty flooding her. "She would be delighted," Lady Constance interjected swiftly. "Would you not, Juliana?" The Duke's expression cooled slightly. "I prefer to hear Miss Fairmont's answer from her own lips, if you please." The quiet reprimand silenced Lady Constance as effectively as a slap. Juliana met the Duke's gaze directly, searching for mockery or cruel amusement, and finding only patient interest. "I would be honored, Your Grace," she said finally, "though I fear I have no suitable attire for such an outing." "You look perfectly suitable to me," the Duke replied, and the simple words held more warmth than any flowery compliment might have. "Shall we say 2 o'clock? I will return with my carriage." After he departed, chaos erupted. Lady Constance immediately ordered Juliana to change into her best walking dress, while simultaneously berating her for nearly refusing the Duke's invitation. Clarissa wept dramatically about the injustice of her elder sister receiving such attention while she remained ignored. Millicent declared the entire situation a temporary madness that would surely end in humiliation for all of them. Only Philippa remained calm, helping Juliana prepare while offering quiet encouragement. "He looked at you," Philippa observed as she adjusted Juliana's bonnet. "Not through you, as most men do with women they consider beneath notice. He truly looked at you, my dear. Whatever his reasons, they are genuine." At precisely 2 o'clock, the Duke's carriage returned. He handed Juliana in with courteous attention while Lady Constance hastily arranged herself as chaperone, much to Philippa's amusement. As they drove through Mayfair toward Hyde Park, the Duke maintained a conversation that was both proper and oddly personal, asking about her interests and opinions, with what seemed genuine curiosity rather than polite obligation. "I took the liberty," he said, producing a package wrapped in brown paper, "of bringing you something. You mentioned enjoying Mr. Scott's work." Juliana unwrapped the package to discover a beautifully bound first edition of one of Scott's novels, the leather tooling exquisite, the pages crisp and unmarred. "Your Grace, this is far too generous," she protested weakly, her fingers tracing the embossed cover with reverence. "On the contrary, it is merely appropriate," the Duke replied. "I find I value intelligence and literacy far above empty flattery. Your appreciation for literature is refreshing." "Why?" Juliana asked, emboldened by the kindness he continued to show. "Why show such interest in me? Surely you must realize how society will interpret your attentions." For a long moment, the Duke was silent, his eyes fixed on the passing scenery. When he finally spoke, his voice held a note of something almost like weariness. "I am weary of performance, Miss Fairmont, of young ladies who agree with my every utterance, who laugh at jests that are not amusing, who see only my title and fortune. You spoke to me as though I were simply a man rather than a duke. That honesty is rarer and more valuable than you might imagine." The admission, delivered in that cool, controlled voice, struck something deep within Juliana's chest. Here was the most powerful peer in England, confessing to loneliness in his own way. "I understand loneliness," she said quietly, aware of her stepmother's sharp attention from the opposite seat. "I have been lonely in a house full of family for 5 years." The Duke's hand moved as though to take hers, then stopped, propriety maintaining its hold. But the look he gave her held understanding that needed no physical touch to convey its meaning. As the carriage rolled through Hyde Park, drawing stares and whispers from every passing group, Juliana felt the first fragile stirring of something dangerous. Hope. The days following the Duke's formal call unfolded with a precision that both thrilled and unnerved Juliana. Adrian Montclair proved himself a man of deliberate intention, his courtship conducted with the same calculated efficiency he presumably applied to managing his vast estates. Each morning, precisely at 11 o'clock, his carriage arrived to collect Juliana for rides through Hyde Park, always with either Lady Constance or Philippa serving as chaperone. The transformation in Juliana's household had been swift and complete. Viscount Fairmont, who had scarcely acknowledged his eldest daughter's existence for 5 years, now appeared at breakfast each morning to inquire about her plans. Lady Constance had commissioned an entirely new wardrobe, the bill sent directly to the Duke with a presumption that made Juliana's cheeks burn with shame. Clarissa and Millicent oscillated between sullen resentment and transparent attempts to ingratiate themselves with their suddenly valuable sister. "It is obscene," Juliana confided to Philippa one morning as they waited for the Duke's arrival. "They treat me as though I am a prize mare being prepared for auction." Philippa adjusted the ribbons on Juliana's new bonnet, a confection of silk and lace that cost more than Juliana's entire previous wardrobe combined. "Welcome to the marriage market, my dear. Though I confess, your circumstances are rather more dramatic than most. The Duke's interest has elevated you from forgotten spinster to society's most discussed woman in less than a fortnight." The reality of that statement became evident each time they ventured into Hyde Park. Other carriages slowed as they passed, their occupants craning necks to catch a glimpse of the unlikely couple. Whispers followed them along every path, speculation running rampant about the Duke's motivations and Juliana's prospects. On this particular morning, as Adrian handed her into his elegant barouche, Juliana noticed a new tension in his bearing. His greeting remained courteous, his manner impeccable, but something troubled the usual composure of his features. "You seem preoccupied, Your Grace," Juliana ventured once they had begun their circuit of the park. Philippa sat opposite them, her attention diplomatically fixed on the passing scenery. "Merely considering estate matters," Adrian replied, though his ice-gray eyes held something more complex than business concerns. "Tell me, Miss Fairmont, have you given any thought to our previous conversation about the nature of honest discourse?" Juliana recalled their exchange during that first carriage ride, his admission of weariness with artifice. "I think of it often, Your Grace, though I confess I still do not entirely understand why you have chosen to single me out for your attention. Do you not?" His gaze held hers with an intensity that made breathing difficult. "I would have thought my admiration for your intellect and honesty sufficiently clear." "Those qualities are hardly unique to me," Juliana protested. "Surely among all the eligible ladies of the ton, there must be others who possess intelligence and sincerity." "Perhaps," Adrian conceded, "but they hide such qualities beneath layers of performance, afraid that genuine thought might somehow diminish their appeal. You, Miss Fairmont, speak as though you have nothing to lose by being truthful." "That fearlessness is remarkable." "Because I have nothing to lose," Juliana thought but did not say. When one has already been deemed unmarriageable, there is a certain freedom in abandoning pretense. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of another carriage, this one drawn by matched grays and bearing the crest of the Ravenswood family. Juliana felt Adrian stiffen beside her, his expression shifting to something even more guarded than usual. The carriage drew alongside theirs, and from within emerged a vision of sophisticated beauty. The woman was perhaps 8 and 20, with dark hair arranged in elaborate curls beneath a bonnet of crimson silk that matched her expensive pelisse. Her features possessed a classical perfection, high cheekbones and a full mouth that curved into a smile holding more calculation than warmth. "Adrian," she called, her use of his Christian name deliberately familiar. "How delightful to see you abroad. It has been far too long since we last spoke." The Duke's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Lucinda," he acknowledged with cool formality. "I had not realized you had returned to London." "Only recently," the woman replied, her dark eyes sweeping over Juliana with an assessment that managed to be both brief and thoroughly dismissive. "I find myself quite eager to resume old friendships after my period of mourning. You will recall, of course, that my dear husband passed away last autumn." "I offer my condolences," Adrian said, his tone suggesting the words were merely social obligation rather than genuine sympathy. Lucinda's smile widened slightly. "How kind. Though I confess country life grew quite tiresome. London holds so many more interesting diversions." Her gaze flickered to Juliana once more, this time with unmistakable curiosity. "Will you not introduce me to your companion?" Adrian's reluctance was evident, but propriety demanded compliance. "Lady Lucinda Ravenswood, may I present Miss Juliana Fairmont, daughter of Viscount Fairmont. Miss Fairmont, Lady Ravenswood." "Charmed," Lucinda murmured, though her expression suggested otherwise. "How unusual to see you with company during your morning rides, Adrian. You have always been so very particular about maintaining your solitude." The implication hung in the air, suggesting an intimacy with the Duke's habits that went beyond casual acquaintance. Juliana felt something cold settle in her stomach, though she maintained her composure. "Circumstances change," Adrian replied tersely. "If you will excuse us, we have an engagement." "Of course," Lucinda said smoothly. "Though I do hope we might speak more privately soon, Adrian. There are matters I would discuss with you, old matters that require resolution." As Lucinda's carriage departed, an uncomfortable silence settled over their own conveyance. Philippa caught Juliana's eye, her expression conveying sympathy and concern in equal measure. "That woman," Adrian said finally, his voice tight with controlled emotion, "is someone from my past. Her presence in London is unexpected and unwelcome." "You need not explain yourself to me, Your Grace," Juliana said quietly, though curiosity burned through her. The familiarity between Adrian and Lady Ravenswood had been unmistakable, suggesting a connection that went deeper than mere acquaintance. "I prefer to be transparent with you," Adrian replied, though his face remained closed. "However, some matters are not easily discussed in present company." The remainder of their drive passed with strained conversation, the easy rapport they had been developing disrupted by Lady Ravenswood's appearance. When Adrian returned Juliana to the Fairmont townhouse, his farewell held a distraction that had not been present before. "The Duke seems troubled," Philippa observed once they were inside. "That woman's reappearance has unsettled him considerably." "They clearly share some history," Juliana said, removing her bonnet with hands that trembled slightly. "Did you notice how she called him Adrian? Such familiarity suggests more than casual friendship." "Indeed," Philippa agreed. "Lady Ravenswood is known in certain circles as a woman of considerable ambition. Her marriage to Lord Ravenswood was thought to be financially motivated, though she conducted herself with perfect propriety throughout. That she approaches the Duke so boldly as a widow suggests she may have designs upon him." The thought sent a spike of something painfully similar to jealousy through Juliana's chest. What claim did she have on the Duke's affections? A few carriage rides and thoughtful gifts did not constitute an understanding, regardless of what society might speculate. That afternoon brought a formal invitation, delivered by the Duke's liveried footman. Adrian requested the honor of Juliana's presence at a musicale to be held at his London residence, Windermere House, 3 evenings hence. The invitation specifically included Lady Philippa as companion and chaperone. "This is significant," Lady Constance announced, examining the heavy cardstock as though it might reveal hidden meanings. "To be invited to the Duke's own home, to meet his acquaintances and be seen as his particular guest. Juliana, you must be on your absolute best behavior. Everything depends upon making the proper impression. No pressure whatsoever," Philippa murmured to Juliana later, as they reviewed the new evening gowns that had been delivered that morning. "Though I confess I am curious to see Windermere House. It is said to be magnificent, though rather cold in its grandeur." The evening of the musicale arrived with autumn rain pattering against the windows of the Fairmont townhouse. Juliana dressed with care in a gown of pale green silk, the color bringing out the gold in her blonde hair and the green of her eyes. Philippa had insisted on simple pearl earrings rather than anything more elaborate. arguing that Juliana's natural elegance required no excessive ornamentation. Windermere House exceeded even Juliana's elevated expectations. The mansion occupied an entire block in Mayfair, its classical facade illuminated by dozens of torches despite the rain. Inside, marble columns soared toward painted ceilings, and gilt-framed portraits of Montclair ancestors gazed down upon guests arriving for the evening's entertainment. Adrian greeted them personally in the entrance hall, his evening attire impeccable, his manner courteously formal. Yet Juliana sensed something different about him here, in his own domain. This was a man entirely comfortable with power, surrounded by evidence of his family's long history and substantial wealth. "Miss Fairmont, Lady Philippa," he said, bowing over each of their hands. "Welcome to Windermere House. I hope you will find the evening agreeable." "Your home is magnificent, Your Grace," Juliana said honestly, her eyes traveling over the opulent surroundings that somehow managed to feel cold despite their beauty. "I am pleased you think so," Adrian replied. "Though I confess, it has felt rather empty of late. A house this size requires more life within its walls than one solitary occupant can provide." The implication in his words made Juliana's heart race, but before she could respond, other guests arrived, requiring Adrian's attention as host. He directed a servant to show them to the music room, promising to join them shortly. The music room proved as impressive as the entrance hall, with a magnificent pianoforte positioned beneath a crystal chandelier. Perhaps 30 guests had gathered, representing the cream of London society. Juliana recognized several faces from various balls and gatherings, though few had ever deigned to acknowledge her existence before. The forgotten Fairmont girl, she heard one matron whisper to her companion, caught the Duke's attention through some clever artifice, no doubt. "It cannot possibly last." "She is pretty enough, I suppose," another replied, "though hardly what one would expect for the Duke of Windermere. No fortune, no connections worth mentioning, and positively ancient for a debutante." Philippa's hand found Juliana's arm, squeezing gently in silent support. "Pay them no mind," she whispered. "Jealousy makes people cruel." The evening progressed with performances from several accomplished musicians, though Juliana found concentration difficult. Her attention kept drifting to Adrian, who moved among his guests with cool courtesy, but seemed to seek her out repeatedly with his gaze. Each time their eyes met across the room, Juliana felt that same electric connection that had marked their first meeting. During the interval, as guests mingled and refreshments were served, Adrian materialized at Juliana's side. "Might I show you the library?" he asked quietly. "I believe you would appreciate the collection." With Philippa following at a discreet distance, Adrian led them through corridors lined with paintings and sculptures until they reached a pair of carved oak doors. Beyond lay a room that stole Juliana's breath entirely. The library soared 2 stories high, with bookshelves covering every available wall space. Leather-bound volumes numbered in the thousands, their spines gleaming in the light of multiple candelabra. A fire burned in the marble fireplace, and comfortable chairs invited hours of reading. "Oh," Juliana breathed, moving toward the nearest shelf with reverent steps. "This is extraordinary. My grandfather began the collection," Adrian explained, genuine warmth entering his voice for the first time that evening. "Each generation has added to it. I find this room the most peaceful in the entire house." Juliana's fingers traced the spine of a first edition, her heart full with unnamed emotion. A man who valued books this highly, who maintained such a collection and clearly spent time within these walls, possessed depths that society's cold Duke did not begin to suggest. "You are welcome here whenever you wish," Adrian said softly, moving to stand beside her. "I would be honored to share this sanctuary with someone who truly appreciates its worth." Before Juliana could respond, a commotion from the entrance hall drew their attention. Raised voices carried down the corridor, one of them distinctly female and unpleasantly familiar. Adrian's expression shifted to something approaching anger. "Excuse me," he said tersely. "I must attend to this matter." He strode from the library, leaving Juliana and Philippa exchanging worried glances. Unable to resist, they followed at a distance, reaching the entrance hall in time to witness Lady Ravenswood standing in dramatic pose, her crimson evening gown a vivid slash of color against the white marble. "I received no invitation. It is true," Lucinda was saying to the flustered butler. But surely Adrian would not wish me excluded from his entertainments. We are such old friends after all. Lady Ravenswood. Adrian's voice cut through the hall with icy precision. This is a private gathering. I must ask you to leave. Lucinda's perfect features arranged themselves into an expression of wounded innocence. How cold you have become, Adrian. There was a time when you welcomed my presence. The implication in her words sent murmurs rippling through the guests who had gathered to witness the confrontation. Juliana felt something twist painfully in her chest, seeing the truth written plainly in the woman's confident bearing. Whatever history existed between Adrian and Lady Ravenswood, it had been significant. That time has long passed, Adrian replied, his control absolute, despite the obvious tension in his shoulders. I will bid you good night. After Lucinda's dramatic departure, Adrian returned to his guests with apologies for the disruption. But the evening's pleasure had been spoiled, the atmosphere strained by unspoken questions and rampant speculation. As Adrian escorted Juliana and Philippa to their carriage at the evening's end, he paused, his hand hovering near Juliana's. I apologize for that unpleasantness, he said quietly. Lady Ravenswood's behavior was inappropriate and unwelcome. You need not explain yourself to me, Your Grace, Juliana replied, though her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. Nevertheless, I wish to, Adrian said with sudden intensity. There are matters in my past that require addressing, but I assure you, Miss Fairmont, my interest in you is genuine and uncomplicated by any prior attachment. Juliana wanted desperately to believe him, but as their carriage rolled through London's rain-slicked streets, she could not shake the image of Lady Ravenswood's confident smile, nor the familiarity with which she had spoken Adrian's name. The remainder of the musical passed in a haze of discomfort. Though Adrian returned to his hosting duties with admirable composure, the atmosphere had been irreparably altered by Lady Ravenswood's dramatic intrusion. Guests whispered behind fans and over champagne glasses, speculating about the nature of the relationship between the Duke and the beautiful widow. Juliana found herself the subject of pitying glances and barely concealed curiosity. She maintained her dignity through sheer force of will, responding to pleasantries with mechanical politeness while her mind churned with questions she had no right to ask. When the final performance concluded and guests began to depart, Adrian materialized at Juliana's side once more. His expression remained carefully controlled, but something in his eyes suggested an inner turmoil that matched her own. Miss Fairmont, Lady Philippa, he said quietly, before you depart, might I have a moment to speak with Miss Fairmont privately? In the library, with Lady Philippa present at the doorway, naturally. Philippa glanced at Juliana, who nodded slightly despite her confusion. They followed Adrian through the now emptying corridors back to the magnificent library she had admired earlier. Once inside, with Philippa positioned discreetly near the entrance, Adrian moved to stand before the fireplace. For a long moment he said nothing, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames as though seeking answers in their movement. I owe you an explanation, he said finally, though I find the words difficult to form. You owe me nothing, Your Grace, Juliana replied, though her heart ached with the need to understand. We have no formal understanding. Your past relationships are not my concern. Are they not? Adrian turned to face her fully, and for the first time since they had met, his careful mask slipped entirely. Pain flickered across his features, raw and unguarded. I have singled you out publicly, Miss Fairmont. I have made my interest clear to all of London society. You deserve to know what manner of man seeks your company. Juliana sank into one of the leather chairs, her legs suddenly unsteady. Then tell me, Your Grace, who are you beneath the coldness that society sees? Adrian moved to the window, his tall figure silhouetted against the rain-streaked glass. I am a man who learned early that emotion is a weakness to be suppressed rather than expressed. My father was a stern taskmaster who believed affection would soften his air beyond usefulness. My mother died when I was quite young, and with her went any warmth in our household. He paused, his jaw tightening. There was a loss in my childhood, a traumatic event that shaped everything that followed. I learned that allowing oneself to care deeply invites unbearable pain. So I stopped caring. I mastered the art of appearing engaged while remaining entirely detached. That sounds like a lonely existence, Juliana said softly. It was. It is. Adrian's voice held a weariness that pierced her heart. Until I met you. You speak to me as though I am merely a man deserving honesty rather than a duke requiring flattery. That simple truth has awakened something I thought long dead. Juliana rose, moving closer, though propriety suggested she should maintain distance. Why do I sense you are building walls even as you tear them down? You offer me glimpses of vulnerability, then retreat behind formality. Because vulnerability terrifies me, Adrian admitted, the confession clearly costing him. I have spent 33 years perfecting emotional detachment. To abandon those defenses now feels impossibly dangerous. And Lady Ravenswood? Juliana forced herself to ask the question that burned through her. What role does she play in your guarded heart? Adrian's expression hardened. Lucinda represents everything I wish to forget. She is ambitious, calculating, and entirely self-serving. Whatever connection we once shared ended badly, and her reappearance in London is both unwelcome and concerning. She seemed quite familiar with you, Juliana observed. The way she spoke your name suggested intimacy. There was a time when I believed I might care for her, Adrian said carefully. But I discovered that she valued my title and fortune far above any personal regard for me as a man. The realization hardened what remained of my ability to trust. Before Juliana could respond, a commotion outside the library drew their attention. Raised voices echoed through the corridor, one of them distinctly feminine and furiously angry. Adrian's expression shifted to barely controlled rage. She has returned, he said through clenched teeth. I specifically instructed my staff to deny her entry. He strode toward the door, but before he could reach it, Lady Ravenswood swept into the library with the force of a summer storm. Her crimson gown seemed to blaze in the firelight, and her dark eyes glittered with something that might have been desperation or fury. Adrian, you cannot simply dismiss me, Lucinda declared, ignoring the butler who hovered anxiously behind her. We have unfinished business, you and I. We have nothing, Adrian replied coldly. I asked you to leave once. I will not do so again with such civility. Lucinda's gaze swept to Juliana, and her perfect lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. Ah, the little nobody who has captured your attention so inexplicably. Tell me, Miss Fairmont, do you truly believe Adrian's interest in you is genuine? Or can you not see that he is using you to make a point to society? That is enough, Adrian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register that Juliana had never heard before. You will not speak to Miss Fairmont in such a manner. Why not speak truth? Lucinda moved further into the room, her movements deliberate and predatory. Adrian and I share a history that you cannot begin to comprehend, Miss Fairmont. We understand each other in ways that transcend your simple conversations about books and poetry. Understanding built on calculation and ambition is no understanding at all, Adrian countered. Now leave, Lucinda, before I have you forcibly removed. Something desperate flashed across Lucinda's beautiful features. You cannot have forgotten what we meant to each other. The plans we made. The future we discussed. The future you discussed, Adrian corrected sharply. I was merely a means to an end for you, a title to elevate your position. When you realized I would not be as easily manipulated as you hoped, you withdrew your interest. Do not pretend our connection was anything more than your calculated attempt at advancement. Lucinda's composure finally cracked. I made a mistake, she said, her voice rising. I was young and foolish and allowed others to influence my decisions. But I have changed, Adrian. My marriage to Ravenswood taught me what truly matters. How convenient that you discovered these insights after securing a widow's independence and fortune, Adrian replied with cutting precision. Your transformation appears remarkably aligned with your financial interests. Juliana watched the exchange with growing discomfort. The intimacy of their argument, the way they spoke as people who had once shared confidences, made her feel like an intruder in a private drama. I should go, she said quietly, moving toward where Philippa waited. No, Adrian said immediately, his attention snapping back to her. Please, Miss Fairmont, do not leave because of this unpleasantness. But Juliana had already made her decision. The weight of Adrian's complicated past, the confident beauty of Lady Ravenswood, and her own sense of inadequacy combined into a certainty that she did not belong in this world of dukes and calculated relationships. "I thank you for a lovely evening, Your Grace," she said formally, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. "But I believe it is best if I return home." She moved past Lady Ravenswood without meeting the woman's triumphant gaze, Philippa falling into step beside her. They had nearly reached the entrance hall when Adrian caught up to them, his long strides eating the distance between them. "Miss Fairmont, Juliana, please," he said, and the use of her Christian name stopped her in her tracks. "Please do not leave like this." Juliana turned to face him, seeing genuine distress in his ice-gray eyes for the first time since they had met. The cold Duke had vanished entirely, replaced by a man struggling with emotions he clearly did not know how to navigate. "I ask only that you trust me," Adrian continued, his voice low and urgent. "Lucinda's presence here is an unwelcome complication, nothing more. She holds no place in my heart, no claim on my affections. You, however—" He paused, seeming to struggle with words that had never been spoken aloud before. "You have managed to breach defenses I thought impenetrable. That terrifies me more than I can adequately express." Juliana studied his face, searching for deception and finding only raw honesty. "Your Grace, I am not equipped for such complications. I am a simple woman who has lived a quiet life. I do not know how to navigate the intrigues of your world." "Then we shall navigate them together," Adrian replied, taking a step closer. "I am asking you to trust me despite the barriers I have built, despite my inability to express myself as other men might. I am asking you to see past my failings to the man who is trying, however ineptly, to open himself to the possibility of genuine connection." Behind him, servants moved discreetly through the entrance hall, pretending not to witness their employer in a state of uncharacteristic emotional display. Philippa had moved away slightly, offering what privacy she could while maintaining her chaperoning duty. Juliana felt the pull of his words, the sincerity in his voice. Yet doubt lingered, fed by years of being overlooked and undervalued. "I need time to think," she said finally. "This evening has been overwhelming." "I understand," Adrian replied, though disappointment flickered across his features. "But know this, Miss Fairmont, whatever Lucinda may claim, whatever society may whisper, my interest in you is the most genuine thing I have felt in years. I am a man who has forgotten how to feel, and you are teaching me to remember. That is worth far more than any past connection, real or imagined." As Adrian handed her into the carriage, his fingers lingered on hers for just a moment longer than propriety allowed. Juliana felt the warmth of that touch all the way home through London's dark streets, wondering whether she had the courage to trust a man who admitted he did not know how to love, but seemed desperate to learn. 3 days after the disastrous musicale, Adrian appeared at the Fairmont townhouse with a request that surprised everyone. He wished to take Juliana for a drive beyond the confines of Hyde Park to the countryside estate of a friend where they might walk more freely. Lady Constance immediately insisted on accompanying them, but Adrian's firm politeness made clear that Lady Philippa would serve as chaperone, or there would be no outing at all. The drive through London's outskirts proved unusually quiet. Adrian seemed lost in thought, his ice-gray eyes fixed on the passing scenery with an intensity that suggested he was gathering courage for something difficult. Juliana watched him covertly, noting the tension in his jaw and the way his gloved hands gripped the edge of the seat. They arrived at a modest manor house surrounded by autumn gardens ablaze with color. The owner, having been forewarned of their visit, had tactfully absented himself, leaving his grounds available for their use. Philippa settled herself in the morning room with a book, positioning herself where she could observe the garden paths while maintaining appropriate distance. "Thank you for coming," Adrian said, as they began to walk along a gravel path lined with chrysanthemums. "I know my behavior at the musicale must have seemed chaotic." You were dealing with an unwelcome intrusion," Juliana replied carefully. Lady Ravenswood appeared quite determined to make a scene. "Lucinda has always been determined," Adrian said, his voice tight. "It is one of the qualities I once admired in her, before I realized her determination served only her own advancement." They walked in silence for several moments, the only sound the crunch of gravel beneath their feet and the distant call of birds preparing for winter. When Adrian spoke again, his voice held a vulnerability that made Juliana's heart constrict. I told you at Windermere that I had experienced a loss in childhood, he began. I mentioned it only briefly, but you deserve to know the full truth if we are to continue our acquaintance. You need not share anything that causes you pain, Juliana said gently. On the contrary, I find I must. Adrian stopped walking, turning to face her fully. My sister Amelia died when she was 8 years old. I was 15 at the time, old enough to understand the tragedy, but young enough to be destroyed by it. Juliana felt tears prick her eyes at the raw pain in his voice. I am so sorry. She drowned in the pond on our estate. Adrian continued, his gaze fixed somewhere in the distance. She had gone there to pick water lilies, wanting to surprise our mother with flowers. I was supposed to be watching her, but I had become absorbed in a book and failed to notice when she wandered away. By the time they found her, it was far too late. Oh, Adrian, Juliana whispered, abandoning formality in the face of such anguish. My father never forgave me, Adrian said flatly. He barely spoke to me after that day except to issue commands or reprimands. My mother simply faded away, dying of grief within 2 years. I learned that allowing oneself to feel deeply leads only to unbearable pain, so I stopped feeling. I mastered every lesson my father set before me. I took my place in Parliament and society, and I felt nothing at all. Juliana reached out instinctively, her hand finding his arm. That must have been terribly lonely. It was survival, Adrian replied. Or so I told myself for 18 years, until I met you at Lady Pembroke's ball, and discovered that perhaps I had not killed all capacity for emotion after all. Perhaps I had merely buried it beneath layers of self-protection. They resumed walking, moving deeper into the garden where roses still bloomed despite the advancing season. Juliana shared her own story then, speaking of her mother's death and the subsequent abandonment by her family. When Mama died, it was as though I lost my only advocate in the world, Juliana said softly. My father retreated into cards and drink. Lady Constance, who had always resented Mama, took her revenge on me. My half-sisters were given every advantage while I was slowly erased from family life. For 5 years I have felt invisible. I see you, Adrian said with sudden intensity, stopping once more to face her. That is what you must understand, Juliana. I see you with a clarity that frightens me because it means I am capable of caring again, and caring makes one vulnerable to loss. Life makes us vulnerable to loss regardless, Juliana replied. The question is whether we allow fear of loss to prevent us from living at all. Something shifted in Adrian's expression, a softening that transformed his austere features. You are remarkably wise for someone so young. I am 7 and 20, Juliana reminded him with a slight smile. Hardly young by society's standards. You are young to me, Adrian said. Though I confess, your maturity is one of the qualities I find most appealing. You have lived through hardship and emerged with grace rather than bitterness. They had reached a small folly at the garden's far end, a classical structure offering shelter and privacy. Adrian guided her to sit on the stone bench within, then took a deep breath. There is another matter I must address, he said. Lady Ravenswood, you asked about her at Windermere, and I gave you an incomplete answer. You said you no longer had feelings for her, Juliana recalled. That is true, but there is more to the story. Adrian sat beside her, his posture rigid. Years ago, when I was 9 and 20, I believed myself in love with Lucinda. She was beautiful, intelligent, and seemed to understand my reserved nature. I proposed marriage to her, convinced that we might build a life together. Juliana felt something cold settle in her stomach, though she forced herself to remain calm. What happened? She refused me, Adrian said bluntly. Told me that while she valued my title and fortune, she could not marry a man who was, in her words, emotionally dead. She said I would make a terrible husband because I was incapable of genuine affection. That is cruel, Juliana said quietly. It was honest, Adrian countered, at least honest as she understood it. I was exactly as she described, a man who performed the motions of life without truly feeling anything. Her rejection hardened what little remained of my heart. I told myself I was better off alone. And now she returns as a widow, perhaps regretting her decision. Lucinda regrets nothing except miscalculating her own prospects, Adrian said with unexpected bitterness. She married Lord Ravenswood for his wealth, endured what was reportedly a miserable marriage, and now seeks to secure her position through connection to me. Whatever she claims about changed feelings is entirely self-serving. Juliana studied his face, searching for lingering attachment and finding only cold dismissal. You truly no longer care for her? I care nothing for her beyond the basic courtesy one extends to any member of society, Adrian replied firmly. She represents a past I have no interest in revisiting. You, Juliana, represent something entirely different. A future I never imagined wanting but now find I cannot contemplate living without. The declaration hung between them, weighted with significance. Adrian's hand moved to cover hers where it rested on the stone bench, his touch warm despite the autumn chill. I am not practiced at expressing emotion, he continued. I stumble through conversations that should flow naturally, but I am asking you to trust that my feelings, however clumsily expressed, are genuine. I care for you in ways I did not believe myself still capable of caring. Juliana felt tears threatening once more, moved by his honesty and the visible effort it cost him. I do trust you, she said softly, though I confess I am terrified by the possibility of this connection. I have spent so long expecting nothing that the prospect of happiness feels dangerous. Then we shall be terrified together, Adrian said, and the faintest hint of a smile touched his lips. Two damaged people attempting to build something whole. He stood then, drawing her gently to her feet. They had moved to stand in the arched opening of the folly, overlooking a garden still beautiful despite the season's decline, when Adrian's hand lifted to cup her face with infinite tenderness. May I kiss you? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Juliana's breath caught. Yes, she managed. The kiss was gentle, almost tentative, as though Adrian feared she might shatter beneath too much pressure. His lips touched hers softly, testing and exploring with a care that spoke of reverence rather than passion. Yet even in its gentleness, the kiss awakened something profound in Juliana's chest, a warmth that spread through her entire being. When they parted, Adrian rested his forehead against hers, his breath uneven. I should have asked permission first to address such intimate matters with your father, he said, but I find I could not wait. I shall forgive the breach of protocol, Juliana replied, a smile breaking across her face despite the tears that dampened her cheeks. The return journey to London felt entirely different from the outward drive. They spoke of inconsequential things, but their hands remained linked beneath the lap-robe, hidden from Philippa's knowing gaze. That evening, Adrian called formally at the Fairmont townhouse. Viscount Edmund Fairmont received him in the study with barely concealed eagerness, while Lady Constance hovered anxiously in the corridor outside. Your Grace, her father said, his voice obsequious in a way that made Juliana wince. This is an unexpected honor. I wish to request permission to court your daughter with the intention of marriage, Adrian stated without preamble. I believe Juliana and I would suit one another admirably. The Viscount's face transformed with undisguised triumph. Your Grace, you do us tremendous honor. Of course you have my blessing, my enthusiastic blessing. Juliana is a good girl, well-bred despite her advanced age. She will make you an excellent Duchess. I am aware of her qualities, Adrian said coolly, which is why I am proposing marriage to her rather than to one of your younger daughters. The subtle rebuke was not lost on the Viscount, who flushed but nodded vigorously. Of course, of course. When would you wish to make the formal announcement? Within the week, Adrian replied, assuming Juliana accepts my proposal. Later, in the drawing room with both families present, Adrian made his offer formally. Juliana accepted with quiet grace, her heart full despite the calculating expressions of her stepmother and half-sisters. Philippa caught her eye from across the room, her expression conveying both happiness and gentle caution. The announcement in the society papers 2 days later sent London into paroxysms of speculation. The Duke of Windermere, one of England's most eligible and elusive bachelors, had chosen the forgotten daughter of an impoverished viscount. The ton buzzed with theories ranging from secret love affair to calculated alliance, though none could quite explain the match. Through it all, Adrian remained steadfast at Juliana's side, his courtship gaining warmth even as his public demeanor retained its characteristic reserve. For the first time in 5 years, Juliana allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, she had finally been found by someone who truly saw her worth. The weeks following the engagement announcement should have been joyous, filled with wedding preparations and the anticipation of a new life. Instead, they unfolded beneath a cloud of whispered speculation that grew darker with each passing day. Juliana first noticed the change in the drawing room she visited with Lady Constance. Conversations would halt mid-sentence when she entered, only to resume in hushed tones once she had passed. Ladies who had congratulated her engagement now regarded her with expressions that mingled pity and something approaching schadenfreude. "They are saying the Duke chose you because you are malleable," Clarissa informed her one morning with barely disguised satisfaction. "That you will accept whatever arrangements he makes because you are so desperate to escape spinsterhood." "Who is saying such things?" Juliana demanded, though her voice remained steady despite the hurt that bloomed in her chest. "Everyone," Millicent added, examining her reflection in the pier glass. "Lady Ravenswood mentioned it at Lady Sefton's tea yesterday. She said the Duke requires a wife who will not question his activities or demand affection he is incapable of providing. Lady Ravenswood." The name had become a constant presence in Juliana's life, though she had not encountered the woman directly since that disastrous evening at Windermere House. Yet Lucinda's influence spread through London society with the persistence of fog, seeping into every conversation and gathering. Philippa arrived that afternoon with troubled expression. "My dear, we must speak privately," she said, her usual composure fractured by obvious concern. In Juliana's small sitting room, Philippa handed her a folded note. "This was delivered to my residence this morning by a street urchin, who claimed a gentleman paid him to ensure it reached you discreetly." The paper felt heavy in Juliana's hands, as though weighted with ill intent. She unfolded it to reveal anonymous handwriting, the letters carefully disguised yet legible. "Miss Fairmont, if you value your future happiness, you must know the truth about the Duke of Windermere. He has been visiting Lady Ravenswood's residence in the evenings, entering through the garden entrance to avoid detection. Last Tuesday, he departed her home past midnight. Whatever he claims to feel for you, his true affections lie elsewhere. A concerned observer." Juliana read the note 3 times, each perusal making breathing more difficult. "This could be a fabrication," she said finally, though her voice lacked conviction. "It could be," Philippa agreed carefully, "but it could also be truth. My dear, you must confront Adrian directly. Ask him about these accusations. And if he denies them, how will I know whether to believe him?" Juliana's hands trembled as she set the letter aside. "He has already admitted to difficulty with emotional expression. Perhaps he is maintaining contact with Lady Ravenswood while courting me." "Then you deserve to know," Philippa insisted. "A marriage built on deception will crumble eventually. Better to discover the truth now than after vows have been spoken." That evening, Juliana penned a note to Adrian requesting an urgent meeting. His response arrived within hours, suggesting they meet the following afternoon at his club's ladies' parlor, where they might speak with appropriate privacy. But before that meeting could occur, fate intervened in the form of another anonymous message delivered the next morning. This one contained specific details: Lady Ravenswood's residence on Berkeley Square, the garden entrance accessible from the mews, and a suggested time when the Duke might be observed departing. "This is manipulation," Philippa said firmly when Juliana showed her the second note. "Someone wants you to witness something, real or staged, to poison your relationship with Adrian. Then I shall go and discover the truth for myself," Juliana replied, surprised by her own determination. "If Adrian is innocent, I will know it. If he is deceiving me, I must understand the extent of his duplicity before I bind myself to him permanently." That evening, Juliana and Philippa took a hired hack to Berkeley Square, positioning themselves where they could observe Lady Ravenswood's residence without being easily noticed. The autumn night was cold and damp, fog rolling through the streets in ghostly waves. They waited for nearly an hour, Juliana's resolve wavering with each passing minute. Perhaps this was foolishness, trusting anonymous correspondence over the man she had agreed to marry. Then the garden gate opened and a tall figure emerged. Even in the dim light cast by distant street lamps, Juliana recognized Adrian's distinctive bearing, the way he moved with controlled precision, even in apparent haste. He paused at the gate, speaking briefly to someone still hidden in the shadows, then strode toward where his carriage waited in the mews. Juliana felt something shatter inside her chest, a pain so acute it stole her breath entirely. "Juliana," Philippa whispered, her hand finding her friend's arm. "Wait, there may be an explanation." But Juliana had already made her decision. She stepped from the shadows as Adrian approached, her voice cutting through the fog with surprising strength. "Your Grace," she said, and he froze mid-step, his face registering shock and something that might have been fear. "How convenient to encounter you here, so far from your own residence and so very late in the evening." "Juliana," Adrian said, recovering his composure though his expression remained troubled. "What are you doing here?" "I might ask you the same question," Juliana replied, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "Though I believe I can deduce the answer. You have been visiting Lady Ravenswood." "It is not what you think," Adrian began, taking a step toward her. "Do not insult me with denials," Juliana interrupted. "I have just watched you leave her residence past 11 o'clock at night. Whatever explanation you offer cannot change that fact." "If you would allow me to explain the circumstances," Adrian said, his usual control slipping to reveal genuine distress. "The circumstances? That you have been conducting clandestine meetings with a woman who openly pursues you? That you have been maintaining contact with your former love while professing devotion to me?" Juliana's voice rose despite her efforts at restraint. "I trusted you, Adrian. You asked me to see past your coldness to the man beneath, and I tried. I opened my heart to someone who warned me he did not know how to feel. How foolish I have been." "Juliana, please." Adrian reached for her hand, but she stepped back, avoiding his touch. "No," she said firmly. "I will not be made a fool. Whatever game you and Lady Ravenswood are playing, I refuse to participate further." The confrontation ended with Juliana departing in the hack, leaving Adrian standing in the foggy street with an expression of devastated confusion. The following evening brought Lady Pembroke's grand autumn ball, an event Juliana had planned to attend on Adrian's arm. Instead, she arrived with Philippa and her family, her heart heavy but her resolve firm. She found Adrian near the refreshment room, conversing with several gentlemen about parliamentary matters. When he saw her, he immediately excused himself and approached with visible urgency. "Juliana, I must speak with you privately," he said quietly. "Allow me to explain what you witnessed." "There is nothing to explain, Your Grace," Juliana replied, loudly enough that nearby guests turned to observe. If she was going to do this, she would do it publicly, removing any doubt about her intentions. "I can no longer in good conscience continue our engagement." The words fell into sudden silence as the orchestra paused between pieces. Juliana felt the weight of dozens of stares, the rustle of fans and whispered speculation rising around them like a physical presence. "You cannot mean this," Adrian said, his face pale. "Juliana, I beg you to reconsider." "I have reconsidered thoroughly," Juliana said, removing the engagement ring from her finger with trembling hands. "I return this to you with my regrets. We are not suited after all." She pressed the ring into his hand and turned away before he could respond, walking through the parted crowd with as much dignity as she could muster. Behind her, she heard the explosion of whispered conversation, society's fascination with scandal overwhelming any sense of decorum. Lady Constance intercepted her in the corridor, her face mottled with fury. "What have you done?" she hissed. "You have destroyed everything." "I have preserved my dignity," Juliana replied wearily. "Your dignity?" Her father appeared, his face flushed with wine and rage. "You have made us laughingstocks. The connection to Windermere was our salvation, and you have thrown it away. Perhaps you should have considered my happiness rather than your financial circumstances," Juliana said quietly. Viscount Fairmont's expression turned ugly. "You ungrateful child. After all we have done for you, the clothes we purchased, the opportunities we provided. You will regret this decision, I assure you." Philippa materialized at Juliana's side, her presence a buffer against her family's rage. "Perhaps this conversation might better take place at home," she suggested firmly. But the Viscount had not finished. "You are no daughter of mine," he declared, his voice carrying to the interested observers gathering in the corridor. "You have always been a disappointment, but this defiance exceeds all bounds. Consider yourself disinherited. You will leave my home immediately." The words should have devastated Juliana, but instead she felt a strange sense of relief. Her father had finally spoken aloud what had been true for 5 years. She had no place in the Fairmont household. "Juliana will come home with me," Philippa announced, her arm linking through her friend's. "She is welcome in my residence for as long as she requires." As they departed Lady Pembroke's ball through a gauntlet of curious stares, Juliana caught one final glimpse of Adrian. He stood motionless in the center of the ballroom, the ring clutched in his hand, his expression more open and anguished than she had ever seen it. For a moment, doubt flickered through her resolve. Then she remembered him emerging from Lady Ravenswood's garden gate, and her heart hardened once more. The coldest duke in England had proven he possessed a heart after all, but it belonged to someone else. Outside, in Philippa's carriage, Juliana finally allowed the tears to fall. She had spent 5 years invisible and overlooked, then briefly believed herself seen and valued. Now she was back where she had started, alone except for one loyal friend. But this time, she had chosen her solitude rather than having it forced upon her. That, at least, was something. The morning after the broken engagement dawned gray and cheerless. Juliana sat in Philippa's guest chamber, staring at her hands as though they belonged to someone else. She had spent the night alternating between tears and numb exhaustion, her mind replaying the image of Adrian emerging from Lady Ravenswood's residence until the memory became a physical ache. "You must eat something," Philippa urged gently, placing a tray of untouched breakfast on the bedside table. "Starving yourself accomplishes nothing. I feel nothing," Juliana replied quietly. "After 5 years of feeling invisible, I finally allowed myself to hope. Now I understand why I should have maintained my defenses." Philippa sat beside her friend, taking her cold hand. "My dear, something about this entire situation troubles me deeply. Adrian's behavior at that ball, the devastation on his face, it did not appear feigned. A man conducting an affair would surely show guilt or anger, not such complete bewilderment. Perhaps he is skilled at deception," Juliana suggested, though even as she spoke the words, doubt flickered through her resolve. Across London, Adrian Montclair paced the length of his study with barely controlled fury. He had spent the night examining the sequence of events that had led to Juliana's discovery of his presence at Lady Ravenswood's residence, and the more he considered the matter, the more convinced he became that he had been deliberately manipulated. The anonymous letters Juliana must have received guiding her to Berkeley Square at precisely the moment he departed. The convenient timing of his summons to Lady Ravenswood's home, a message claiming urgent matter requiring immediate attention that had proven entirely false upon his arrival. Someone had orchestrated the entire scenario with malicious precision. "Your Grace." His secretary appeared at the door, looking unusually agitated. "Lord Geoffrey Harfield is here demanding an audience. He appears quite distressed." "Send him in," Adrian said coldly. He had been planning to investigate Lord Geoffrey's financial situation, having heard whispers of substantial gambling debts, but perhaps the man would save him the trouble. Geoffrey entered the study with the desperation of a cornered animal. His usually immaculate appearance had deteriorated, his cravat askew, his face unshaven. "Your Grace, I must speak with you about a matter of utmost importance," Geoffrey began without preamble. "I have done something unconscionable, and my conscience will no longer permit silence." Adrian gestured to a chair. "I am listening." The confession that followed confirmed Adrian's worst suspicions. Lady Ravenswood, Geoffrey revealed with shaking voice, had approached him months ago with a proposition. She would pay his considerable debts in exchange for his assistance in separating Adrian from any potential bride. Geoffrey had initially refused, but as creditors grew more insistent and threats of debtor's prison loomed, he had capitulated. "The anonymous letters to Miss Fairmont were my doing," Geoffrey admitted miserably. "Lady Ravenswood provided the information about your movements, having bribed one of your footmen to report your schedule. She fabricated the emergency that brought you to her residence that evening, timing it precisely so Miss Fairmont would witness your departure. And the witnesses who claimed to have seen me visiting Lady Ravenswood regularly," Adrian's voice was dangerously quiet, Paid actors, Geoffrey confessed. Lady Ravenswood has substantial funds at her disposal following Lord Ravenswood's death. She has been planning this campaign for months, determined to eliminate any rival for your affections. Adrian's control finally shattered. You have destroyed an innocent woman's happiness for money. You have participated in a scheme of calculated cruelty that has caused immeasurable harm. I know, Geoffrey said wretchedly. That is why I have come to you now. Lady Ravenswood believes she has won, that Miss Fairmont's public rejection of you has cleared her path to becoming your Duchess. But I cannot live with what I have done. I will testify to everything publicly if necessary, regardless of the consequences to myself. Adrian studied the broken man before him, contempt warring with grim satisfaction. You will indeed testify publicly, he said finally, this evening at Lady Sefton's ball, and you will bring documentation of every payment Lady Ravenswood made to you. Within hours, Adrian had assembled irrefutable evidence of the conspiracy. Bank records showing substantial transfers from Lady Ravenswood's accounts to Geoffrey's creditors. Written instructions in Lucinda's hand detailing the timing and content of anonymous letters. Testimony from the bribed footman who had grown conscience-stricken and agreed to confirm his role in exchange for clemency. That evening, Lady Sefton's ballroom glittered with London's finest, all gathered to dissect the scandal of the broken engagement between the Duke of Windermere and Miss Juliana Fairmont. Speculation ran rampant, with most agreeing that the unfortunate girl had been used by the calculating Duke, who clearly harbored feelings for the beautiful Lady Ravenswood. Adrian arrived unfashionably early, requesting a private audience with Lady Sefton. The hostess, intrigued by the Duke's unusual intensity, agreed immediately. I require your assistance in a matter of justice, Adrian said without preamble. A conspiracy has been perpetrated against an innocent woman, and I intend to expose it publicly this evening. I ask only that you permit me to address your guests before the dancing begins. Lady Sefton, who possessed both shrewd intelligence and a fondness for dramatic revelation, agreed with barely concealed delight. As guests arrived, whispers intensified. The Duke of Windermere stood near the entrance, his usual cold composure replaced by barely contained emotion. When Lady Ravenswood made her entrance, resplendent in emerald silk, she found Adrian waiting. Your Grace, she greeted him with confident triumph. How delightful to see you. I trust you have recovered from your unfortunate entanglement with Miss Fairmont. Walk with me, Adrian replied tersely, guiding her toward where Lady Sefton had arranged a small platform typically used for announcements. As the orchestra fell silent and guests gathered expectantly, Adrian's voice rang across the ballroom with icy precision. Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you this evening to address a matter of grave importance. A conspiracy has been perpetrated to destroy the reputation and happiness of Miss Juliana Fairmont, and I will no longer permit lies to stand unchallenged. Gasps rippled through the assembled crowd. Beside Adrian, Lady Ravenswood's face had gone pale. Lord Geoffrey Harfield, Adrian continued, gesturing to where Geoffrey stood with visible reluctance. Please share with this company what you confessed to me earlier today. Geoffrey stepped forward, his voice shaking but audible. He detailed the entire scheme, the bribes, the false letters, the paid witnesses. With each revelation, the crowd's reaction grew more horrified. When Geoffrey produced the bank records and Lady Ravenswood's written instructions, passing them to Lady Sefton for verification, shocked murmurs became outraged exclamations. You lie! Lucinda finally found her voice, her composure cracking entirely. This is a fabrication designed to humiliate me. The evidence speaks clearly. Lady Sefton interjected, examining the documents with obvious fascination. These are indeed substantial payments made to Lord Geoffrey's creditors, all traceable to your accounts, Lady Ravenswood. I did it for love. Lucinda's beautiful facade shattered completely, revealing desperate obsession beneath. Adrian was mine first. That insignificant nobody had no right to him. I made a mistake years ago, refusing his proposal, but I deserve a second chance. You deserve nothing from me, Adrian said coldly. You orchestrated a cruel campaign against an innocent woman because you valued my title and fortune above all else. That is not love, Lady Ravenswood. That is avarice dressed in romantic delusion. The scandal erupted immediately. Guests surrounded Lady Ravenswood and Lord Geoffrey with a mixture of condemnation and morbid curiosity. Lady Sefton, sensing the evening had provided more entertainment than any planned activity could offer, declared the conspiracy the most dramatic revelation of the season. Adrian did not remain to witness Lucinda's social destruction. He had more important matters to attend to. Philippa's residence was modest compared to the grand townhouses of Mayfair, but its warm interior reflected its owner's generous spirit. When Adrian's urgent knock sounded at the door, Philippa herself answered, her expression shifting from surprise to cautious welcome. "Your Grace," she said quietly, "I am not certain Juliana wishes to see you." "I must speak with her," Adrian replied, and the raw emotion in his voice clearly moved Philippa. "Please, Lady Philippa, I can explain everything." Juliana appeared at the top of the stairs, drawn by Adrian's voice. She had not changed from her morning dress, and her face bore traces of recent tears. Yet her posture remained proud, her gaze steady despite obvious pain. "I have nothing to say to you, Your Grace," she said. "Then listen only," Adrian replied, moving to the base of the stairs with complete disregard for propriety. "Juliana, you were right to distrust what you saw that evening, but you were entirely wrong about its meaning." He detailed the conspiracy then, speaking with an urgency that made his usual controlled manner seem like a distant memory. He explained Geoffrey's confession, the evidence of manipulation, Lucinda's obsessive campaign. "I was summoned to her residence under false pretenses," Adrian said, his voice rough with emotion. "A message claiming urgent matter requiring immediate attention. When I arrived, there was nothing. I departed as quickly as propriety allowed, only to discover you waiting. Someone orchestrated that entire encounter specifically so you would witness it, and draw exactly the conclusion you did." Juliana descended the stairs slowly, her eyes searching his face. "Why should I believe you now?" "Because I am laying my heart completely bare for the first time in 18 years, Adrian replied, and there were tears in his ice-gray eyes. "Because you taught me how to feel again, Juliana, and losing you has shown me exactly how much I stand to lose if I do not fight for this connection." He reached for her hands, holding them gently. "I told you I was a man who had forgotten how to feel. You awakened emotions I thought dead. That terrified me, but not as much as the prospect of living the rest of my life without you. I love you, Juliana Fairmont. I love your intelligence, your honesty, your strength in the face of neglect and cruelty. I love the way you see me as a man rather than merely a duke. I am asking, no, I am begging you to give me another chance to prove myself worthy of your trust." Juliana felt tears streaming down her face as she studied the man before her. The cold duke had vanished entirely, replaced by someone vulnerable and desperately sincere. "I want to believe you," she whispered. "But I am frightened, Adrian. Frightened of being hurt again. Then we shall be frightened together," Adrian said, echoing words he had spoken in the garden weeks before. "But we shall face that fear united rather than alone." Juliana looked at Philippa, who nodded encouragingly from her position near the door. Then she turned back to Adrian, seeing in his face everything she had hoped to find, genuine devotion laid bare without artifice or protection. "I forgive you," she said softly, "though there is nothing to forgive, truly. We were both victims of a malicious scheme." Adrian pulled her into his arms then, propriety abandoned entirely as he held her close. "I will spend the rest of my life proving myself worthy of your faith in me," he murmured against her hair. The following evening at Lord Pemberton's grand ball, Adrian made a declaration that would be discussed in London drawing rooms for years to come. He stood before the assembled company with Juliana at his side, the Fairmont family present among the watching crowd, and spoke with unprecedented emotion. "I stand before you to correct a grave injustice," he announced. "Miss Juliana Fairmont is mine to protect, mine to cherish, mine to wed. She has agreed once more to become my Duchess, and I count myself the most fortunate man in England." The applause was thunderous, society delighting in the romance of reconciliation. Even Viscount Fairmont and Lady Constance, who had come hoping to salvage some connection to ducal prestige, found themselves forced to acknowledge Juliana's triumph. As Adrian led Juliana into a waltz, she smiled up at him with genuine joy. "The coldest duke in England has quite thoroughly melted," she observed. "Only for you," Adrian replied, and for the first time since his childhood, he smiled openly for all the world to see. The wedding of Adrian Montclair, Duke of Windermere, to Miss Juliana Fairmont took place on a crisp November morning at the ducal estate in Kent. Windermere House, that grand edifice that had seemed so cold upon Juliana's first visit, had been transformed for the occasion into something approaching warmth. Garlands of autumn flowers adorned every column and doorway, their rich colors bringing life to marble halls that had known too many years of solitary silence. Juliana stood in the bride's chamber, gazing at her reflection with wonder. The wedding gown was a masterpiece of ivory silk and delicate lace, commissioned by Adrian himself with instructions to spare no expense. Her blonde hair had been arranged in an elegant style that incorporated the pearl hairpin her mother had given her years ago, the only piece of jewelry she had retained from her former life. "You look absolutely radiant," Philippa said softly, adjusting the veil with gentle hands. As Juliana's chosen witness and companion, Philippa had stood by her friend through scandal and reconciliation, never wavering in her support. "I have never seen a more beautiful bride. I feel as though I am in a dream," Juliana admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "After so many years of invisibility, to be here, to be marrying Adrian, it seems impossible." "You deserve every happiness," Philippa assured her. "Adrian is fortunate beyond measure to have won your heart." A knock at the door announced the arrival of Lady Sefton, who had graciously agreed to serve as matron of honor alongside Philippa. The influential lady examined Juliana with satisfaction. "Perfect," she declared. "You shall set every tongue wagging with your elegance. The Duke has excellent taste, despite his previous coldness." She smiled conspiratorially, though I confess watching him thaw has been the most entertaining spectacle of the season. The chapel at Windermere had been filled to capacity with London society, all eager to witness the marriage that had provided such dramatic entertainment. Viscount Fairmont sat rigidly in his designated pew, his face alternating between pride at the connection and resentment at having lost control of his daughter. Lady Constance beside him wore expensive new clothing purchased with Adrian's generosity, her expression sour despite the magnificent occasion. Clarissa and Millicent, dressed in matching gowns of pale rose, watched their elder sister with undisguised envy. As Juliana entered the chapel on her father's reluctant arm, a collective gasp rose from the assembled guests. The forgotten daughter of an impoverished viscount had become something transcendent, her quiet dignity transformed into radiant grace. But Juliana saw only Adrian, standing before the altar with an expression that stole her breath entirely. The cold Duke had vanished, replaced by a man whose face shone with unguarded emotion. His ice-gray eyes held hers as she walked toward him, and for the first time since anyone could remember, the Duke of Windermere smiled openly, genuinely, without reservation. The ceremony proceeded with traditional solemnity, though Adrian had insisted on personalized vows that departed from standard Anglican service. When the time came for him to speak, his voice rang clear and strong through the chapel. "Juliana, I was a man who had forgotten how to feel, who had built walls so high around his heart that I believed nothing could breach them. You saw past those defenses to the person I had buried beneath duty and control. You taught me that vulnerability is not weakness, that feeling deeply is the greatest strength we possess. I vow to spend every day of our life together, proving myself worthy of the gift you have given me, the gift of your trust, your faith, and your love." Tears streamed freely down Juliana's face as she spoke her own vows. "Adrian, I was invisible for so long that I forgot I had value beyond what others saw in me. You looked at me and saw worth where everyone else saw only a spinster past her prime. You chose me not despite my circumstances, but because you valued who I truly am. I vow to be your partner in all things, to stand beside you through whatever challenges we face, and to remind you always that you are capable of far more love than you ever believed possible." When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Adrian's kiss was gentle but unmistakably passionate, drawing approving murmurs from the guests and scandalized gasps from the more conservative attendees. The wedding breakfast that followed showcased Windermere's grandeur at its finest. The great hall had been decorated with such elegance that even London's most critical matrons found no fault. Course after magnificent course emerged from the kitchens, accompanied by the finest wines from the ducal cellars. During the toasts, Adrian rose to address his guests, his hand firmly clasping Juliana's. My friends, you have witnessed something remarkable today. Not merely a wedding, but a transformation. I stand before you as a man reborn through love, and I have my Duchess to thank for that miracle. To those who doubted our match, who whispered that she was unsuitable or I was using her, I say this: Juliana Fairmont, now Juliana Montclair, Duchess of Windermere, is the finest person I have ever known. Her strength, her intelligence, her capacity for grace under circumstances that would have broken lesser souls, these qualities make her not merely suitable, but extraordinary. I am the one who is unworthy, and I shall spend my life attempting to deserve her. The applause was thunderous, though Viscount Fairmont's expression suggested he had swallowed something bitter. Lady Constance maintained a frozen smile, while Clarissa and Millicent dabbed at tears that might have been emotion or frustrated envy. As evening fell and guests began to depart, Juliana found herself in the Duchess's chambers once more. Philippa helped her change from the elaborate wedding gown into a nightdress of ivory silk, its simplicity somehow more intimate than the grandest attire. I shall see you tomorrow, Philippa said, embracing her friend warmly, though I suspect you will be too occupied to receive visitors immediately. Thank you, Juliana whispered, for everything. For being my friend when I had none. For believing in me when I could not believe in myself. That is what friends do, Philippa replied simply. Now go to your husband. He has been watching the door for the past hour, waiting for propriety to allow him to join you. When Adrian entered the chamber, still wearing his wedding attire though he had removed his coat, the sight of Juliana waiting for him seemed to steal his breath. He crossed to her slowly, taking her hands in his. Are you frightened? He asked gently. A little, Juliana admitted, but mostly I am grateful. Grateful to have found you. Grateful that we fought for this connection, despite every obstacle placed in our path. Then let me show you. Adrian murmured, cupping her face with infinite tenderness. Exactly how grateful I am to have found you as well. The months that followed saw Windermere House transformed from cold museum to living home. Juliana's influence spread through every room, adding warmth without diminishing grandeur. Fresh flowers appeared in arrangements throughout the house. The library became a shared sanctuary where husband and wife spent countless hours reading together or discussing the books they loved. The formal drawing room acquired comfortable furniture that invited actual conversation rather than stiff propriety. Adrian, true to his vows, gradually opened himself to emotions he had suppressed for years. The transformation was not dramatic. He would never be an effusive man, but those who knew him well saw the difference. He smiled more readily. He laughed at jests. He demonstrated affection for his Duchess with a tenderness that made even hardened cynics acknowledge the genuineness of their connection. Philippa visited regularly, becoming not merely Juliana's friend, but part of their household's extended family. Together, the three of them formed an unconventional but deeply loyal circle. The Fairmont family attempted reconciliation, with Viscount Edmund appearing at Windermere one autumn afternoon, with elaborate excuses for his previous harshness. Adrian received him with cool courtesy but made clear that while civility would be maintained, true forgiveness required more than convenient apologies. You treated my wife abominably for 5 years, Adrian said quietly but firmly. You ignored her worth, exploited her labor, and discarded her when she needed family most. We shall acknowledge your connection out of respect for societal convention, but do not expect warmth where you sowed only coldness. The Viscount departed chastened, though Lady Constance continued to send letters requesting visits that went largely unanswered. On a spring morning 6 months after their wedding, Juliana sat in the garden that had been restored under her direction. The roses bloomed magnificently, their perfume carrying on the gentle breeze. Her hand rested on her gently rounded abdomen, feeling the new life growing within. Adrian found her there, as he often did these days, and settled beside her on the stone bench. Dr. Morrison confirms what we suspected, Juliana said softly. We shall have a child before year's end. Adrian's expression transformed with wonder and something approaching fear. A child, he breathed. Juliana, What if I fail? What if I cannot be the father this child deserves? You will be magnificent, Juliana assured him, taking his hand and placing it over her abdomen, because you know what it means to grow up without emotional warmth, and you will ensure our child never experiences that deprivation. You have learned to feel again, Adrian. Our child will grow up surrounded by love. As the afternoon sun cast golden light across the gardens of Windermere, Adrian drew his Duchess close, marveling at the journey that had brought them together. From that first waltz at Lady Pembroke's ball to this moment of perfect contentment, they had traveled a path neither could have imagined. For 5 years, Juliana had watched others marry, believing her chance at happiness had passed forever. For 18 years, Adrian had believed himself incapable of genuine emotion, trapped in coldness of his own making. But love, when it finally arrived, had proven stronger than years of loneliness, or walls built from grief. 2 damaged souls had found each other and built something whole, something beautiful, something that would endure. And as evening fell over Windermere House, the warmth within its walls finally matched the grandeur of its architecture. A home at last for hearts that had wandered too long in cold darkness before finding their way toward light. May you too find love in unexpected places. May you be seen when you feel invisible, valued when you feel worthless, and cherished when you believe yourself unlovable. For true love waits in the most surprising moments, requiring only the courage to open your heart when it finally arrives.